Take it away, John.
All right. Thank you, Dave. How's the mic here? Can folks hear this? Just to ask a couple questions about the audience. How many people here are game designers? Wow, lots. How many people play MMORPGs? How many people have heard of Perfect World? Wow, that's actually pretty good. Well, so I run business development at Perfect World, and that means I partner up with great companies, and I'm here to talk today a little bit about what sells in big MMORPGs and why. First, just a little bit about us, who we are. A lot of people haven't heard of us. A lot of people might not get that reference, but we're an online game developer and publisher. We're based in Silicon Valley, and there's about 443 people in the non-China part of us, and we're working with internal studios like Cryptic and Runic. But we're actually 100% owned by a public company based in Beijing that IPO'd in 2007 and has 429 million in digitally distributed free-to-play revenues. And a lot of people hear that and they say, what? Well, how come I don't know you? Well, 429 million is a lot. How do you get that done? Well, we essentially built a business by launching one MMORPG in 2008, and then 2 the next year, and 3 the year after that, and 4 the year after that. And we're now in our 5th year, and we took Star Trek Online, one of our probably best-known games, free to play on 1701, if you get the reference, January 17th. And Blacklight Retribution, a great game made in Seattle, free to play shooter. It was in the top 10 on Steam before, curse you, summer sale for knocking us off. But it's one of the top 2 or 3 free to play games on Steam right now. So we make these kind of hardcore, heavy, big games, and the one that we're working on next is called Dungeons & Dragons Neverwinter. That's with Wizards of the Coast, and we're really excited about that. But this is the kind of audience that we serve, which is kind of different than the casual Connect audience, I'm thinking. So this is kind of interesting for me to sort of see what, to talk to people and see what works and what is, points of difference between our audiences and our games. We basically, over the last 4 years, we've had a lot of people coming in, and our accounts are in tens of millions, and revenue growing 58% a year, and people growth that's a lot, and lots of people all over the world. And we publish things all over the world with all that stuff that's kind of almost old world, like running data centers and having customer service people and having our own analytics in-house and having our own customer account system and all that kind of stuff. We actually do this, for the most part, in-house. And we partner with either our internal studios, like our homegrown stuff in Beijing, or Cryptic, or Runic, or Unknown Worlds, or we partner with external firms like Myatt and Stairway and Zombie, and we're always looking for more. So the topic of the day is what makes money in big MMORPGs and why. So first I'd like to highlight a couple of the differences between the kind of games that my company makes and I think the kind of games you guys make. First of all, let's define big. These are giant, 1 to 5 gigabytes, and that just refers to the size on the hard drive, and this is all PC, by the way, with the initial install. They patch. We're always adding new content, so these things grow from here, and they get bigger and bigger. Star Trek Online, in fact, continuously streams content depending on what you do as a player, so it just potentially gets very large. And our players like this rich, immersive kind of world. Our kind of games are persistent and synchronous, too. And this guy seems like a persistent and synchronous guy. It's kind of hard to find an image for this. But what I mean here is that our worlds are, for the most part, they exist without the player, and there's very little asynchronous gameplay. There's very little of EVE Online's skill-ups when you're not playing. For the most part, you sort of join the world when you're participating in the world, and the world might evolve without you. But you're almost by definition playing with other people when you're playing at all. There's no single player mode at all. We have deep economies in MMORPGs. So we feature player-to-player trading, and we encourage that, and we want to focus people into a geography where they can actually do this and open a trade window with each other. We have auction houses. These are actually our most asynchronous feature as a class of games, where you can put your items on the auction house and hopefully someone else will buy them at the prices you set. We have player-made auction houses. That's not a picture of that at all. I couldn't find a good one. But we actually support the idea of, hey, each player can set up their own little shop run by an NPC that stays online when you might log off, and so other players can find you and buy what you have to offer. It's a way of kind of making that town bazaar kind of feeling that sort of drives engagement and is pretty interesting for players. We typically feature chat, certainly text chat and oftentimes voice chat. It's optional, but in a lot of ways it's pretty deep. So you don't ever have to type a word in chat or talk to anyone else really to hit the level cap or to do everything that our games offer. But we entice people to do so, and they find that it's in their interest to do so. So we have guilds. Guilds are another thing that are absolutely optional, but we encourage people like, hey, there's bright shinies over here that you can get in the end game and in these hard to get to places. But to do so, you're going to need the support of more than one person. So we actually create these structures that force people to want to interact with each other because of game economy reasons. And so that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about. What we do in the sort of games that we make are we actually think about our customer segments, and we think about where the items come from, how the items get into the world, and what are the rare items, what's the point of them. So we want to have something, each major class of items appeals to somebody and gets to them somehow in a way that mutually reinforces. So I'll elaborate. I'm going to go through a customer segmentation here that is actually, it comes from our Cryptic team, our Cryptic subsidiary, and they divvied up the users into 6 categories. One of them, the pictures are mine, is the enthusiast. Now, this is the person who's deeply invested into our games, and they are passionate about our product, but they don't have much time. So they're very willing to pay. So this is one kind of user who plays our games. Another kind is the dedicated user. So they're also passionate about the game. They get to the end game. They're in the same guilds with these other people. But they really have more time and not very much money. So they typically don't pay. The power gamer, or the max minner. This is a person who really loves the theory crafting. They love figuring out how our game systems work. And in a lot of cases, they post theories that may be wrong, they may be right, but there may be a lot more thought put into it than what our designers did. And they're incredibly smart. And they notice, and they want to eke maximum performance out of the game mechanics. We also have stylish players or collectors. These people love to live in the fantasy and immerse themselves in the world we created. So they want to believe that they're that Chinese sword mage on a giant flying sword, or that they are their version of Jean-Luc Picard. So, and they love events and one-time items that demonstrate their visual flair and their visual uniqueness. Artisans. Typically, our games have a core mechanic, a core loop that is focused on combat. So we have all these secondary systems that aren't combat, and the artisan really does a lot of work with them. They like to craft. They like to collect pets. They like to do enchantments and enhancements. So they provide a very important part, a role in the ecosystem. And also the auctioneer. Doesn't this guy look like he's doing something obscene? But he's actually not. So these guys buy low and sell high. And for them, it's an exciting part of the game to really play the market. So that certainly doesn't appeal to everyone, but they also are critical in our economy. So then, thinking about where the items come into our world from, this is sort of one categorization of them. There's grinding and questing, which is fundamentally a solo activity. There's dungeons, where you can't really get through them by yourself. So we want to encourage you to group together, raids being the high end of that. Crafting, which is mining stuff out of the environment, some kind of exploration mechanics as well. And then we have events. A lot of times our items become available to people only in a time-limited way, when we're doing a content expansion, or when it's Valentine's Day, or something like that. Of course, we've got the cash shop, and we have some other trade secrets of sort of the way we get items into the economy. But there's also auctions and trade, because you can redistribute these things from people who weren't the original purchaser. So face-to-face trade on a one-to-one basis or anonymous trade through an auction house are actually important redistribution methods. So if you look at all this together, we very consciously think about, okay, these are all of our different player types, and these are sort of the ways items can come into our worlds. And again, every game is a little different, so this is sort of tailored, as the case may be. But we think about, okay, what about an item like potions? What are the point of potions? Well, potions are supposed to be temporary buffs. Okay, well, those are important. Let's not make other gear, maybe, that provides temporary buffs, so that's a little bit of the game design. But then we think, well, how's this going to get into the world, and how are people going to interrelate with it? So here's one example. I should have done this in a build. But the artisan there crafts a potion from auction house material, the reagents that they got from the auction house, from an auctioneer, and they trade them maybe to their guildmate who wants that absolute performance, the max minner. So in this way, we're actually making different people feel useful for doing the things that they like. And this has been something that we've evolved over time. Perfect World has 10 games live in America today, and more in Europe and China. But we found that about 50% of our toolkit for mechanisms and systems like this apply to the next game, and about 50%, well, we really need to understand what's scarce and special about your game to work with it. So another example, spell reagents. Oh, actually, if I could just go back for a moment, the dotted lines indicate that, yes, there might be potions for sale in the cash shop and that drop in the dungeons, but those aren't as good as what the crafter can do. This is why the crafter is special, because only they can make the best of it, and the max miner is going to notice that. But let's look at spell reagents, and this is a classic ecology between the players of the person who's got a lot of time but no money, and the person who's got a lot of money but no time. So for example, the cash-rich guy down there might trade for something that the dedicated person at the top mined, or I guess went into a dungeon to collect. That guy on the top has all the time in the world to keep going back and back and back to that dungeon, but you grind enough boss mob skeleton creatures and you get a lot of bone chips. That's what gets traded to the guy who's got all the cash. But the cash guy is trading for something that he bought in the cash shop, because he's got to trade for something. It's not just a gift. So in this way, the items that are bought in the cash shop actually get redistributed through the economy a little bit more than the standard, hey, 5% of our players pay for something, would lead you to think. So this is something that's kind of subtle and doesn't appear in the stats, but when you sort of dive to the next level deeper, we can find these things out, and we find that our players do this. Okay, so a little bit of actual data. Let's look at 4 of those 10 Perfect World games, and what I've done is taken data from the last 6 months, and I've stripped out data about retailing and bundling, which actually turns out to be really important. When you put things on sale, when you combine them with other items, when you make them time limited, when you do all those things, it actually influences what people buy quite a lot. So let's strip that all out and just look at the categories for some of our games. Now, we're a Chinese company, so this is kind of hard for us to even sort of talk this much about it. But these categories here represent things like accelerants, auction house items, buffs, chat enhancements, crafting, fashion, fireworks, guilds, mounts, guild enhancements or mounts. That's just the first half of the alphabet for some of these categories. And one category sort of pops out as the second most common there, one that we call refining, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on that in a moment. But here's a second game where refining is actually the biggest seller. So that's interesting. What is refining? The third game has refining as 31% of the revenue. Interesting to note that, well, and the fourth game, I should say, has no refining at all. It doesn't play a role that is meaningful in this world. We just don't offer it. So this is not a panacea, but it's something that is kind of interesting, and I want to explore why we think that this is potentially interesting for our player base. But first, all these different revenue categories, a lot of them are very custom to the game. So if you look at those 4 games and all the categories that we have, how many of them are unique to, well, how many of them appear in every game? In other words, 4. Only 3 of them. So fashion is one of those items, right? In most of our games, people want to buy fashion items. Refining is one of those things that appears in 3 of the games, but actually a lot of them, as you see along the bottom, are actually unique to the game. So it takes some experience to sort of know what's going to sell and why, and there really isn't a universal standard for this kind of stuff. So let's talk about refining. What is refining? Well, refining is fundamentally, you take 2 things from the world and you combine them together to make something better. So an example of that is like I get some diamond dust and I combine them together to make a whole diamond, and I can slot that in my sword and it makes the sword turn on fire. Something like that. You can then add all kinds of things to speed it up, to make it more powerful, to remove a breakage chance, to enhance the results that come out of it, to prevent all kinds of negatives that might come out of the systems. And that turns out to be really powerful. And why is that? So for the moment, I'd like to go into a little diversion on prospect theory. Does anyone know about this? Good, okay, because I'm only going to, only 1 or 2 of you. So I'm going to give the simplest and easiest to grok part of what is some fascinating research that was done back in '79 by these guys who were investigating why people make the choices that they do and why sometimes that's irrational. So here's an experiment. If I flip a coin and if I win, heads I win, tails you win. If I win, you pay me $1. But if you win, I pay you $1. Would you play that game? And a lot of people say, no, John, I mean, I barely know you. I wouldn't want to lose $1. I mean, that's potentially bad for me. Okay, but it's statistically even. So what if I sweeten the deal? I make it, you win, you get $1.25, and you know, I win, I still get $1. A lot of people still say no, because they don't like the idea of losing. What if I say $2 to you if you win and $1 to me if I win? That turns out to be where a lot of people start to say yes. And it's a really interesting conclusion we can draw as designers. Well, I won't count myself as a designer, but for designers, people want to avoid a loss about twice as much as they want to get a win. So that's really intriguing. So we know that in free-to-play games that if you just sell power, if you just sell the flaming sword, that cheapens the game because it invalidates the achievements of all the people who did what the game said was scarce to get the flaming sword. So what do? Well, this refining trick, and the trick is in the balance, is one great one. If you had to be there killing the dragons at the end of the raid to get the reagents that can then be combined, that then create the thing you want, then you really had to be there. Right? So it's not like you could have gotten it just by paying to win. But if there's a danger that something might break, or it might not work as well, or it might not be exactly what you wanted, with the thing that you've already got, that's a really powerful bit of psychology. So one of the things that I would encourage, one lesson that we've learned in sort of the big MMOs is, if you can do something like that in casual games, it can be really powerful. So to wrap things up a little bit, what I would encourage casual game designers to do, lessons from the sort of the big MMOs, is to, first of all, enable a broad economy. Something that's rich and potentially has ups and downs, and you've got knobs on the back end that you can control and change sinks and drains, sinks and faucets, I should say. And understand who your players are and what their motivations are, and design something for each of them. If you see that people on the forums or in whatever feedback mechanisms you have want to do a certain thing, well, let's try to make a mechanic that caters to that. But having many of them helps to make it a rich and engaging economy that drives those high ARPUs. Third, know what is scarce and how it's consumed. These really go together to design economies for your player ecology. It's really powerful if everything has its role and you sort of have an elegant purpose for it, and you know that, oh, for example, I shouldn't release a new power that self-reses because that would destroy the point of this other item that's supposed to be from this other class of character. It'll make him not have a point anymore. So it's really important to sort of think of this holistically. And finally, try to find a way to sell at least the perception of loss avoidance. It can be really powerful and really cool. And if you can think of something like that and you're making an iPod game that appeals to young men, we'd love to talk to you at Perfect World. That's it. Thanks so much. So I guess we have a few moments for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Roughly, how do you, say, separate things that are sort of hard items versus transient items in your economies? Do you see more of your revenue in one or the other, like when you're, say, buying time or buying a chance versus actually buying, like, a piece of armor?
I'm sorry, the question is, how do we see hard items versus?
Just versus, soft, I guess, soft items. It's kind of, I mean, that's what I call them. But basically, items where you're getting something tangible in the game, like a piece of armor, versus things that just buy you a chance or buy you a speed up.
Yeah, so the question is, how do we see the difference between monetizing something that's tangible, maybe visible, armor and the like in a game versus things that are intangible, like, I don't know, a respec or a boost to your XP or so on. So one of the things we found in our games is that it's really important to have that visual distinction. The Bank at Ironforge feeling, which refers to the World of Warcraft way of sort of like, you're there when you're doing your business, you see all these other people, and some of them have glowing shoulder pads, and that really drives you to be envious of them and to want to get them. And now I have to play the game more with whatever the game says I got to do to get those glowy shoulder pads. That's really important. Interestingly, the intangible stuff oftentimes tend to be a smaller percent of the revenue. They play a role, but in a lot of our games, it tends to be about the immersion. So visual things really work.
The breakdown between, say, consumable items versus things that are persistent with the player.
Breakdown between consumables and persistent items. It does depend game to game. I mean, if the way that you're running your game is something where consumables are a core part that really help you do one of the most important things, then consumables can be pretty high. We often find that it's not, partly by design choice. To be envious of it, consumables do go away pretty, it's not. Interestingly, I was producing a game that was localized from Korea, and they had the choice of a one-day item, a 7-day, a 30-day, or unlimited. And by far, the two most popular were the one-day and the unlimited. Those intermediates, like people either wanted a trial or they wanted ownership, but they weren't as happy with the stuff in the middle. Another question? Yes, sir.
I know there are some facts that female gamers tend to want a lot of customization, different colors and stuff like that. Do you find that to be true for the male audience? Do they want stuff in different colors and different appearances, or not so much?
Yeah, so the question is, female gamers purportedly want fashion variations. Do male gamers also? Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, when we sell, I don't know, wedding kits, when we sell vampire costumes, you know, those sort of things go gangbusters. And a lot of times we don't just sell them. Sometimes it's from the Halloween event where you've got to kill the boss 5 times to get, you know, combine all the items, and then you've got the vampire set. So those sort of items are really, really powerful. It's not limited to women at all. Probably 85% of Perfect World's player base are male. So it's kind of a classic, you know, we make Star Trek and Dungeons and Dragons. You know, that's our kind of player base. You know, and they absolutely love to express themselves visually. Yeah. Okay, thanks so much.